Bonjour and welcome back to my channel. My name is Claude and today I'm going to be doing a book review for you of a book by Caitlin Matthews called Untold Tarot, The Lost Art of Reading Ancient Tarots. Now I've chosen this because I received a couple of emails from you asking me about how to read with pip decks like the Tarot de Marseille, because I do read a lot with pip decks. So I thought this would be the perfect book to show you because it's really well written, and also I thought I knew my stuff, and this book took me to school. It really did. Now I've had it for a long time now and I've read it many times. I refer to it regularly, as you can tell by the broken spine. So this is how it looks. And it retails on Amazon at the time of recording for $22.49. I'm just gonna read you the back of it very shortly. So it says, discover forgotten divinatory skills and learn to read the cards with confidence. Not just another tarot book, Untold Tarot presents historic styles of reading little known in the modern era. Rather than simply including set card meanings to learn by rote, it teaches traditional ways of reading, used for pre-20th century decks, drawing upon older cartomantic arts such as blending and pairing cards, reading lines and following line of sight to piece together untold stories according to the direction in which the characters are facing. So this is a really beautiful book, and I'm hoping that at by the end of this review you may have changed your mind if you just read with illustrated pips and realize that reading with pip decks can actually be also very intuitive. So Caitlin Matthews is, well, she's really well known, and she's written several books. I've also got her book on the Lenormand reading oracle. So here's a short bio. She's a world-renowned author and teacher in the Celtic and ancestral traditions, tarot and divination. She's the author of over 70 books, including Singing the Soul Back Home, Celtic Visions, and a complete Arthurian tarot with John Matthews. She has her own shamanic practice in Oxford, UK, where she also hosts masterclasses in healing arts. And she has a website, which I'm going to show you right here if you are interested. So the book is firstly really beautiful. It's a soft book, but it's got the covers that unfold, which I love because it's nice to keep track of the pages, and the quality of the paper is amazing. It is a glossy, I don't know if you can see, but not, you know, like a satiny. It's beautiful, and it's all colored. Let me show you colors since I talk about it. So visually this is beautiful. It's lovely in the hands, really really nicely made. And so let's start with this. So you've got a table of content, dedication, and the table of contents like you would have with any other book. A preface, and she says something which, to be honest, I really associated with it, so I'm going to read you just a very quick couple of sentences. And she said, ancient tarots fascinate me. My first ever tarot back in 1969 was a Grimoire Tarot de Marseille, which I worked with while I was at drama school in London before moving on to the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, on which the pip or number cards each had a pictorial image. Since my favourite toy as a child had been a pack of playing cards, I had a great fondness for the patterns of the pips and found the moves from pips to pictures oddly irritating. The framing of the pips by specific and suggestive images seemed to circumscribe my reading, restricting possible meanings to a very narrow set of possibilities. You see, she had me right there with this couple of sentences, because it is how I feel. Now, I have many tarot decks, including the Rider-Waite-Smith. I have clones of it and inspired tarot decks, but I also have Tarot de Marseille, and when I get one that has pictures on the pips, sometimes I find that it reduces my intuition. And I know people say that the pips do not help you with your intuition if you want to be an intuitive reader, and I disagree. And this book really proves that you can use your intuition whilst reading a pip deck or a Tarot de Marseille deck, which is why I really wanted to show it to you. So it begins with telling the untold story This is the introduction, and in this chapter she goes over identifying the cards. So she talks to you about the trumps, about how the numbers look like if you're not familiar with it. So she really starts with the basis. She goes through the aces, and then she moves on to the suits, and then she moves on to the court cards. You see the book is stunning even just to look at it, to be honest. And then she has a note on the suit names and how to choose a tarot. So it takes you right from the beginning, which I like. The first chapter is called Speakers of the Untold Story. And this is really where she delves into the history of it. You know, because the Rider-Waite-Smith, although is a very, very successful deck, it only started in the 19th century, whereas the tarot really started way before that, in 14th century, 15th century in Italy, and then in France. So she goes on to talk about all of this. I'm just showing you, what it looks like. You have a beautiful table of the Bolognese Italian, style of it, with the trumps listed and all of the suits and their divinatory meaning at the time. It really is very, very interesting. And she gives you some tips as well on how to read cartomantically. Then she moves on to chapter 2, the eloquent trumps. Now this chapter is totally dedicated to the trumps. And it's done really, really nicely. So she talks about the order of the trumps, and she gives you a big table with the differences between the Florence tradition, the Venice and the Milan, and she explains with the different names. Then you have a big picture of all the trumps, and then you have a double page for each of the trump cards. So you've got the inset here, a quote, then the different languages, what it looks like, then the keywords for upright and reversals, who the trump represents as a person, some examples, of a combination, and then a whole description. And so she goes on to all of them, so I'm not going to bore you with all of them, because, you can have a look yourself. And then she explains the trumps as indicators. And there's a really nice table here where she goes through the rites of passage and the motion and pace. So she shows you the trumps and what they represent if you look at the trumps from that angle. She talks about pairing the trumps and possible pairings. We then move on to chapter 3, the talkative pips. Now this is the chapter that you probably will be interested in, because it's how to gain meanings from the pips, even though there are no real pictures. So she talks about the suit origins, from the playing cards, and she shows you, what suits matches what playing cards, the names in Italian, French, and their association. And then she talks about approaching the pips. So she gives you loads of pointers, basically, on how to interpret them. And she even gives you tips on how to do a visual reading with the pips, which you can. You can gain insights by looking at the pips. This is very, very interesting, and it's really well explained. I cannot recommend this highly enough. Then she talks about the pip number associations. So, 1 is the beginning, and 2, partnership, cooperation, all of that. So she goes through all of the numbers. Again, really nicely explained. And then she talks about the qualities of the suits. So you have a brief explanation here, and then you've got this very interesting table where she has listed all of the swords and their characteristic. So the primary quality and how it's expressed. So if we look at the beginning, for instance, so you've got swords is truth, batons, which are the wands, energy, cups is compassion, denier or coins is wisdom, and it's expressed as, so for truth is enforcing justice, For the wands, it's the power. For the cups, it's love. For the pentacles or coins, it's caution. And she has loads of different associations, and this is really, really helpful to have. I really I'm a big fan of this table particularly. Then she talks about combining number and suit keywords, which means you'll always know what to say about your cards if you know the numeral meanings and the suit keywords. Very, very interesting. And yep. And then she moves on to the cartomantic pips. And again, there is a very, very nice table, which I think is here, where she explains the relationships between the trump numbers and the numbers on the pips. So for instance, the aces, which are number 1, they are associated obviously with the magician, also with card 11, which is strength in the Tarot de Marseille, not justice, and the world. And so if you read this table, you get aces are juggler, fortitude, so strength and world, which means confidence, self-control, and completion. And she goes through all of them like that. Very interesting. I do use it when I do my own readings. And then she delves into more depth from that little grid. She gives you all of that. So, I mean, you know, it really is a comprehensive book. She also talks to you about the court cards under this chapter. And then she goes on to giving you some spreads. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes at the same time, trying to remember what I wanted to talk to you about. So she gives you some spreads as well. And then the next chapter is the conversational courts. So that's where she delves even more depth, even though she touched in chapter 4 on the courts. So she talks about the origins. She gives you keywords and suits as well. So you know the origins, courts and suits as people, and the keywords and the suit that goes with it. Again, this is very comprehensive. You see pages, and she goes swords, batons, cups, and deniers, and gives you possible meanings. And then she talks about reading the courts directionally. You know, so who's facing who, are they facing each other, courts of the opposite sex, and that kind of thing. Very interesting. She then talks about the cardinal virtues in tarot, and how they relate to the court cards. So, you know, it is in depth. I hope I'm not overwhelming you, but she does give you a little table to understand it. The court card, the deficiency, the virtue, and the excess. So, for instance, if we look at the suit of swords here, the king, as a virtue, the king of swords represents integrity. In an excess, it's legalism, and in deficiency, it's corruption. So for the queen, the virtue is discrimination, the deficiency is foolishness, and the excess is judgmentalism. The knight is envy for deficiency, righteous indignation for virtue, and malicious enjoyment for excess. And in the page, the virtue is truth, the deficiency in understatement, and excess is boastfulness. And she goes on to explain all of them, you know, according to their suits, which is very useful. And then after that, we move on to chapter 5, which is divining skills from earlier eras. She talks about the question and the importance of the question, which is covered in other books, but it's really interesting to see how she talks about that. She goes on to talk about basic skills, reversals, and also blending cards. And then she moves on to give you reading in lines, advice and tips. And there's so many examples, and they're all illustrated, which really is helpful when you're trying to grasp a concept. And she goes through a couple of old spreads here, the cross spread and the passport and the pyramid spread. Then she moves on to chapter 6, the art of directional reading. So again, she talks about significators, and she really, you know, talks about mirror pairs, reading in the direction of the significator. it is really in depth, beautifully illustrated and explained, very well supported, with examples. I mean, I had no problems understanding what was going on there. She even talks about tableau reading, which we find in Lenormand style readings, which I thought was interesting because I do read Lenormands too. And you know, many spreads and ideas, which I find beautiful. Then she moves on to chapter 7, telling the untold story. And she talks about the oldest of spreads. So she explains them, gives you hint on how to read them. You can see with the arrows, it shows you directions. Beautiful. And some of them have many, many, many cards. It is really an impressive book. So at the end you've got endnotes, and you also have the bibliography, the books that, you know, she's based her book on and that you can read. It's very impressive. She's done her research. And then you've got an index. So I mean, I would highly recommend this book. It's really worth the money. I really hope it's going to help you see that you can get very rich readings using a Tarot de Marseille deck, and you can tap into your intuition as well. You don't have to have pictures for that. To me, it's how, you know, people used to read the cards and how it all came about. So I do think it's very interesting. It's really amplified my reading skills. I have so many techniques at the tip of my fingers because of this book. It opened my eyes to things I didn't even know about, you know, and how to pair some things. I just think it's well worth the read and the money. So I hope you've enjoyed this and that you find this at least somewhat useful. If you have any questions or you want to talk to me about this, do let me know in the comment box below. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate you and your support. And I wish you a beautiful day. Until next time, au revoir.